have been slammed. So it was, it's absolutely fantastic, the work that we've done to flatten the curve and, a team of 5 million and all of that. And we shouldn't downplay that. It's crucial. A number of our members, who are senior doctors and dentists, mostly in hospitals, were incredibly anxious and incredibly concerned about what might happen, what they might face, what might happen to them personally and their families as a result of that. So, we're super relieved that we're in the situation that we are now.
So, to this announcement, it was quite in a sense, it was quite a damning opinion piece. Infrastructure creaking, waves of patients missing out. So this extra, $980 million a year, taking the annual budget for DHBs to over $15 billion. You welcome that?
Absolutely. And yes, it's a lot of money, but if you look at what we have been spending on health as a proportion of GDP, we're by no means the biggest spenders on health compared to other countries around the world that you might typically compare us with. And there was room for more. And, what we've noticed is we've got ongoing shortages of senior doctors, which is our particular focus. It's very hard to recruit, and our supply of homegrown doctors can't keep pace with demand. Plus, part of the training of becoming a senior doctor means going overseas for a period of time while you're doing your specialty training. So, it's a long-term fix. But we've also got, hospital buildings and hospital infrastructure that is old, that is tired, that is no longer fit for purpose. And, that is not cheap to change. And I think this government has done some good things. They've finally started doing a proper stock take of hospital infrastructure and plant. And now we've got a better sense of where we're at and what needs to be done. But it's going to take longer than a year or two.
Rawani?
Yeah, sure.
Sarah, can I just ask you, Sarah, as long as we're not seeing, great to spend on infrastructure, great to spend on, talented staff and staff development and training, but as long as we're not seeing that ballooning sort of middle management sort of position, that we have, with hospitals becoming more and more like businesses. Do you see that?
Well, look, it's funny you should mention that, because where you see great management and clinical partnerships in place in hospitals, it's a beautiful thing. So it can work incredibly well, and effective management can be a big piece of the puzzle. But you do have to get the balance right, and people have to be clear about their roles. And obviously, as the Union for Senior Doctors and Dentists, our concern is certainly to ensure that we have enough of those, and we don't at the moment.
Executive Director of Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, Sarah Dalton, thank you very much for your time. Brief comment there, Stephen. Viewing public health differently, it would have been sobering to think how we might have coped if the pandemic had truly hit New Zealand. I was in hospital a couple of days prior and asked, how's the sense? And they said, well, we're prepared, but a bit reticent, quite a bit anxious. There was anxiety there.
Yes, that's right. And if you look at the difference in approach that we've taken, for example, to the lockdown and what have you from Australia, one of the reasons for that is that their health system is better placed than ours, or was better placed than ours, to cope with the challenge of the virus. I mean, absolutely, we're going to have to focus more on health. We're going to spend more on health. That's very difficult for a small economy like New Zealand. Where's the money going to come from? Inevitably, is going to be asked.
Oh, well, that's a big injection, isn't it? $4 billion over the next 4 years. Couldn't be a start. Huh? All right, Stephen Jacoby, Rawani Pereira, thank you very, very much for joining me on the panel. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint is next. With you tomorrow.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, domestic travellers in level 2 alone won't save the tourism industry. Operators warn they need an extension to the wage subsidy, and fast. So with the border closed indefinitely and hundreds of thousands of jobs hanging by less than a bungee cord, what's the Tourism Minister's plan, and is he up for the job? A doctors' union questions whether Waitemata DHB is covering up mistakes that led to 7 nurses being infected with COVID-19. Speaking of DHBs, they've just got a pre-budget cash injection of $4 billion extra over 4 years. School's back next week, but what does social distancing mean for Bull Rush, drinking fountains and the tuck shop at level 2?
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Prime Minister has defended keeping a 10-person limit in place for funerals over the next few weeks, saying people's health must come first. From Thursday, the country will shift to Alert Level 2, allowing people to visit restaurants, cafes and movie theatres with a limit of 100 people on the premises. But private gatherings, including tangi and funerals, will be capped at 10 people. Jacinda Ardern says she, like other world leaders, struggled with the decision but had to play it safe.
Funerals and tangi are a place where you want to comfort people. It is your natural instinct. That's why we come together. And the idea that we would force people to not be able to comfort one another, to support one another, is equally a very, very hard thing to comprehend.
Jacinda Ardern says more than 10 people can attend a tangi as long as they view the tupu paku at separate times. The National Party is threatening to oppose legislation on the enforcement powers under Level 2, saying the rules for tangi and funerals are inhumane. Leader Simon Bridges says they should have a limit of 100 people. He says National will settle for less than 100, but 10 is simply not enough. 2 days before COVID-19 restrictions ease, no new cases of the coronavirus have been reported. The total number of confirmed and probable cases remains just shy of 1,500. 93% of those who contracted the infection have recovered. A tourism recovery package will be announced on Budget Day. Thousands of jobs have been lost and some of the biggest names in the industry are in hibernation. Industry leaders spoke at the Epidemic Response Committee today ahead of domestic tourism returning on Thursday. Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis says the industry will receive additional support in Thursday's budget. Mr Davis says the package will help many businesses, but it won't save all jobs.
But I can confirm that on Budget Day, we'll be announcing further assistance for the tourism sector, and this will include a tourism response and recovery package. So I've listened to the sector, we've worked together, and as the Minister and as a government, I believe our response and recovery plan is balanced, timely and considered.
Kelvin Davis. Hardware and DIY retailer Bunnings is planning to close 7 stores with the loss of as many as 145 jobs. The Australian-owned business says it's reviewed its network given the effect on the sector from COVID-19 and decided the shops were no longer viable. The affected stores are in Ashburton, Hornby, Hastings, Cambridge, Rangiora, Te Awamutu and Putaruru. Here's business editor Giles Beckford.
Bunnings New Zealand director Jackie Coombs says the affected stores had already been facing pressures and COVID-19 had made their positions even worse. She says the decision to close was also influenced by where the stores were located, lease arrangements and how each one was performing. The company, which has already got more than $27 million in wage subsidies, will discuss future options with affected staff, which for some could mean redeployment. This is Giles Beckford.
A doctors' union fears the Waitemata District Health Board is covering up mistakes that led to 7 of its staff contracting COVID-19. Staff from Waitakere Hospital tested positive for the coronavirus after patients from St Margaret's Hospital and Rest Home in Auckland were moved there. The DHB ordered an urgent review into the outbreak earlier this month. But Deborah Powell from the Resident Doctors Association says the review process has lacked transparency.
There's a feeling of cover-up here, which is utterly unnecessary and unhelpful. So I think that's making people more nervous.
Dr Deborah Powell. The Waitemata District Health Board declined RNZ's request for comment. It's expected to release its findings, or the findings of the review, later this week. Principals are deciding how to apply Level 2 rules to classrooms, playgrounds and assemblies. They have just under a week to prepare for the return of 800,000 children to school. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Principals told RNZ there'll be a lot of hand washing and hand sanitizer when schools resume on Monday. Some are closing their drinking fountains, while others are leaving them open with sanitizer nearby. Playtimes are likely to be closely supervised by teachers, and children will be encouraged to play games that don't involve close contact. Big schools are expected to continue virtual assemblies, but smaller schools might be able to hold all school gatherings and still maintain good physical distancing. Ko John Gerritsen, TNA.
It's nearly 5:05. To sport now, All Black Sam Whitelock will play Super Rugby this year after all. Whitelock was going to miss the season, having taken up a contract with the Japanese club Panasonic Wild Knights. However, that contract expires at the end of the month, and with the competition not going ahead, Whitelock will now play for the Crusaders in the Super Rugby Aotearoa competition. That 10-week competition involving the 5 New Zealand franchises kicks off next month. Meanwhile, Wallaby International Kirtley Beale has signed a 2-year deal with French club Racing 92. And a $72 million emergency relief package has been announced for the racing industry. Racing Minister Winston Peters says the industry was already in a weak financial situation prior to COVID-19, but the pandemic has hit it hard and the industry risked insolvency if it didn't receive support. The package consists of $50 million for the Racing Industry Transition Agency to pay creditors and $20 million to build new all-weather racetracks in Christchurch and Manawatu. And that's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, as domestic travel kicks off again, what are the options for Air New Zealand customers given credits for rescheduled flights now likely to cost much more? To Papa ornithologist Colin Miskelly on the incredible birds of the subantarctic Auckland Islands, and Raymond Saga Polotelli on how photography complements the oral storytelling traditions of his Samoan culture. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
And we are funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast taking us to midnight tomorrow Wednesday. From Met Service, Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Gisborne and coastal areas of Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mostly cloudy with a few showers. For the rest of the North Island, mainly fine, areas of morning and evening cloud. The odd shower for a time in northern Waikato tomorrow. Bulla, mostly cloudy, isolated showers clearing up about now. Westland, mostly cloudy. An area of rain north of Harihari at first, but moving south this evening and clearing in the north. Fiordland, mainly fine apart from cloud tomorrow evening. Nelson and Marlborough to Southland, generally fine with high cloud, but a few spots of rain for Canterbury, clearing tonight or in the morning. And at the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, drizzle there at times. It's nearly 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The Tourism Minister is under fire tonight for not acting fast enough. Tourism operators say hundreds of thousands more jobs could be lost while they wait for details of a support package to be announced in Thursday's budget. Frustration grew as industry leaders and opposition MPs grilled Kelvin Davis at today's Epidemic Response Committee, questioning why support for them hasn't come sooner. It comes as Winston Peters today announced a $72.5 million emergency support package for racing, whilst thousands of tourism jobs have already been cut and some of the biggest names in the industry remain in hibernation. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has the details.
Sedima Hotels employs 550 staff, but the COVID-19 pandemic has seen numbers slashed by 85%. Its Chief Operating Officer, Les Morgan, says that may not have been necessary if there was more clarity around government support.
The wage subsidy has been welcomed, but any news about further subsidies come too late. We've made those decisions now because once we go through the consultation period and the notice period, the subsidy's gone. So those jobs haven't been saved. All the subsidy did was prolong it. If there'd been some clarity earlier, that might have changed that situation.
Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis was grilled by National's tourism spokesperson Todd McClay on the government's response and why he's waiting for the budget to announce additional support. It comes as the Racing Minister Winston Peters announced the racing industry will get a more than $70 million emergency support package.
You talked about the package being timely, but the Minister of Health and Minister of Racing felt it necessary to give certainty to their industries. Why couldn't you do that for tourism?
Like I said, it needs to be timely. We've had all those other business support initiatives that are helping businesses. So we have done what we have done to support businesses, and now as we move into the recovery stage, we have another package to announce.
Kelvin Davis declined to be interviewed on Checkpoint today. He had few answers today and refused to give further details about the package to be announced on Budget Day or how many jobs it would save.
We know that it's going to help many, many businesses in terms of the exact numbers of businesses that will be helped. We don't have that direct advice, but the fact of the matter is that we have got a response package, a recovery package for tourism that will help many, many businesses.
Haka Tourism Group General Manager Eve Lawrence says domestic tourism is far from a silver bullet.
I think the general consensus across a lot of my industry colleagues is that if we're lucky, we might see 20% of our revenue year on year. And efforts to reimagine tourism in the middle of a crisis is like calling in an architect instead of the fire service while your house is still burning down. I think we need to first put our efforts in place to save the house and then think about reimagining and rebuilding our industry.
She says their balance sheet can make it through a recession, but not zero revenue.
If we were still trading at a revenue loss of only 30% right now, Haka Tourism Group would be over the moon, to be quite honest. And even with some pivoting, today we're trading at around an 80% revenue loss. And in early March, it was more like 95.
Eve Lawrence wants to see the wage subsidy extended from 12 to at least 26 weeks. Commercial and unhosted accommodation providers like Airbnb to face the same fees, and support for commercial renters. Tourism Industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive Chris Roberts says allowing domestic travel in Level 2 will save thousands of jobs, but not all of them.
We've started to see the higher profile announcements, Air New Zealand, Ngāi Tahu Tourism, Skyline, Sky City, but jobs are going every single day. And I still believe at least 100,000 jobs will disappear. We have feared that it could be as many as 200,000 jobs.
Mr. Roberts says they're expecting a wave of redundancies in June, depending on what's announced in the budget.
We have been suggesting for some weeks now that we need the earliest possible indication of what's going to replace the wage subsidy. It's worked out that we're not going to hear until the budget, and for some, that's going to come too late.
NZ Māori Tourism Chief Executive Panya Tyson-Nathan says operators still face high compliance and concession costs despite hemorrhaging money and staff. Ms Tyson-Nathan says one small North Island operator with 8 staff and a couple of boats pays more than $47,000 in regulation charges a year, excluding tax.
One of two things will happen. One, they'll go into hibernation, and for some businesses, that's not a bad thing.
How do you pay your debt when you hibernate?
Exactly, or you'll collapse. And what I think with some of our businesses that actually are closing or have closed, we're trying to minimise the liability.
She says businesses need a year off from paying high costs, not a year to pay them off. But Chris Roberts says operators are under no illusions that travel will return to normal anytime soon.
So what do you do with your business when you've got no customers Monday to Friday and then a few customers coming in on the weekend? That's tough for a hotel, that's tough for an activity operator, it's tough for every business to manage that. So I think a lot of people are saying it's 10 or 20% of normal. So it's at least some cash when you've had no cash for 7 or 8 weeks.
Even if Trans-Tasman travel is opened up later this year, Chris Roberts says substantial tourism may be off the cards until October. Thursday's budget can't come soon enough as time runs out for these industry leaders.
I just want to say to people in the tourism industry, thank you very much for holding in there with us, and we know how hard it has been. What COVID has taught me is that when we work together, when we withstand the worst, I know we'll come out the other end at our absolute best. So
I'm sure they'll appreciate your thank you to them. I'm not sure they'll be thanking you yet, but we'll see what happens on Thursday.
The tourism industry is hoping their Minister, Kelvin Davis, can deliver at Level 2. For Checkpoint, Ko Tess Brunton, TNA.
A doctors' union fears the Waitemata District Health Board is covering up mistakes that led to 7 of its staff contracting COVID-19. Staff from Waitakere Hospital tested positive for the coronavirus after patients from the St Margaret's Hospital and Rest Home in Auckland were moved there. The Resident Doctors Association says the DHB has failed to answer questions about the outbreak and workers at the hospital are increasingly nervous. Katie Scotcher reports.
The 7 people who contracted COVID-19 at Waitakere Hospital are all nurses. But Dr Deirdre Powell from the Resident Doctors Association says it could have been anyone.
It could have been a cleaner, it could have been a resident doctor, it could have been a laboratory phlebotomist.
It's not yet clear how the nurses caught the disease. Health officials are investigating whether they were infected through environmental contamination after the Waitemata District Health Board ordered an urgent review into the outbreak earlier this month. But Dr Powell says the unions representing hospital workers want answers now, and their repeated questions to the DHB have fallen on deaf ears.
The unions have said to the District Health Board, we're not interested in blame here. We're interested in understanding what went wrong so we can learn from it. That's what we do in health. We don't get better unless we understand where we've made mistakes or where we could have done things better.
Deborah Powell says unions want to know why the nurses and doctors treating patients infected with COVID-19 were able to move between wards and why their PPE appears to have failed. Dr Powell also wanted to know why the St Margaret's patients were taken to Waitakere Hospital in the first place.
When we went into lockdown, vulnerable workers in health were moved away from frontline. They were moved away from potential COVID cases. And quite a few of our North Shore people were put at Waitakere, the vulnerable people, because it was meant to be kept, away from COVID. The COVID ward is at North Shore Hospital.
So RNZ asked the Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield.
Because the level of care it was felt they required was appropriate for Waitakere, it was also closer to their whānau in their community.
The Waitemata District Health Board declined RNZ's request for an interview. RNZ also contacted some of the elected members of the DHB, but all declined to comment. But the urgent review's terms of reference obtained by RNZ reveal a little more detail. It shows a panel is reviewing the Waitakere Hospital's infection, prevention and control measures, as well as the use of PPE, training, rostering and the management of patients. However, it is not investigating how the staff contracted COVID-19. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says he expects to be given a copy of the review today.
The important thing here is we learn from each of the instances we have had so that we can then update our approach and policies, which is nationally, which is what we're intending to do here.
Dr Deborah Powell says the review process has lacked transparency.
There's a feeling of cover-up here, which is utterly unnecessary and unhelpful. So I think that's making people more nervous.
The Waitemata District Health Board has indicated the review will be made public at the end of this week. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
The promise not to get political over COVID-19 has gone out the window, with tempers running high in Parliament this afternoon. The Prime Minister was forced to defend a controversial memo her office issued in relation to last week's document dump. The National Party is threatening to withhold support for crucial legislation because of the 10-person limit for tangi and funerals, describing it as inhumane. But Jacinda Ardern is holding firm, saying after a lengthy discussion, Cabinet agreed to the limit. That also applies to weddings and church services, as they've all proven to be high-risk events for spreading COVID-19. Our political editor Jane Patterson filed this report.
Parliament was starting to sound more like its old rowdy self today, even with the number of MPs scattered around the chamber still greatly reduced under Level 3 restrictions. Nationals leader Simon Bridges resisted any great drama, using his question to press the Prime Minister on the upcoming budget. Then it was the turn of his deputy, Paula Bennett, asking about a leaked memo sent by one of Ms Ardern's staffers.
Why did the leaked memo say there's no real need to defend because the public have confidence in what has been achieved? Instead, we can dismiss.
Speaker, that is not language that I would use.
She was then asked why the opposition had only received a copy of the urgent legislation at such short notice.
We provided an exposure draft for the opposition. Equally, we're providing it to others who have an interest in this area because these are extraordinary times.
Order.
Ms Ardern's deputy Winston Peters ready with ammunition of his own.
Did the Prime Minister get any communication from Mr Bridges or Paula Bennett for insisting upon the 10 people at funerals rule so that the National Party MPs couldn't meet and roll their leaders?
Put the muscle back on.
But much of the debate today has been around why people can go to a movie theatre or restaurant with a limit of 100 people on the premises under Level 2, but not a wedding or funeral. Private gatherings, including tangi and funerals, will be capped at 10 people. Jacinda Ardern says she, like other world leaders, struggled with the decision but had to play it safe.
Funerals and tangi are a place where you want to comfort people. It is your natural instinct. That's why we come together. And the idea that we would force people to not be able to comfort one another, to support one another, is equally a very, very hard thing to comprehend.
The New Zealand First Leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, though, sees no issue with groups of 10 gathering in a hall after a funeral or tangi.
Yes, 10 only, just the same room as a restaurant, the same 3S rule. You are away from there, you're now being governed by a different set. And all I'm saying is, instead of going there socially, you're going for a respectful wake to share with other families. As long as you stick to the rules, there is no confusion.
The National Party leader Simon Bridges says the 10-person limit is inhumane.
And yet, at one of the most tragic defining points at life, at a funeral, direct family members cannot attend them under those rules. That's not just not kind, it's inhumane. And I think we can do better than that.
Legislation's currently being debated under urgency to set the legal framework for enforcement powers under Level 2. But Mr Bridges has drawn a line in the sand over national support.
We're talking to the government. I can only but repeat, we've called for this. We want to see these greater freedoms, but there are very serious concerns, and I certainly wouldn't rule out us voting against this bill.
The debate for the urgent legislation that's expected to go through all stages this evening is underway in the House. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. Let us know specifically if you're in the tourism industry, what you're hoping for in the budget and how things are going out there for you. You can get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The health system has received a budget cash boost in an early budget announcement, in part to help it catch up because of COVID-19. The government will give more than $4 billion extra to district health boards over the next 4 years. Those working in health say the money is very welcome, but more will be needed. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
153,000 people were bumped off schedules for elective surgery, specialist appointments or scans because hospitals had to be ready for COVID-19. Now they're planning how to catch up and will have $283 million to help specifically with that. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says the health system's had to take on something it's never seen before.
We are acutely aware of the fact that when it comes to elective surgeries, these really matter to New Zealanders. These are about their daily lives and their ability to go about them in a pain-free way, for example. And so that's why we've prioritised getting this money up right now to be able to address that backlog.
A surgeon at Counties Manukau DHB, Andrew Connolly, says the funding's very welcome as doctors look at how to fit in all the extra cases.
A huge challenge, but one that we certainly can handle. But it is very complex because a fair proportion of patients weren't seen or treated during the lockdown. Therefore, their priority may now have increased, given it's been 6 or 7 weeks.
The Health Minister, David Clark, says the money's also to cover the change in the way hospitals work because of COVID-19.
There's social distancing now in hospitals. There's also increased cleaning procedures, infection control required. And so that's going to mean that that is a more challenging environment to work in for a period of time for the foreseeable future. And that is going to carry increased cost as well.
He says he expects the DHBs to be creative in how they clear their backlog. Surgeon Andrew Connolly says they're already working on a plan and will need the extra money.
Additional clinics or operating sessions, say at weekends. There would be some use of private capacity. And the onus on the clinicians is to make sure that we get through the work as effectively and efficiently as possible.
The largest share of today's increase, $3.9 billion, goes to district health boards for their day-to-day work. Mr Robertson acknowledges his budget will be very different to what it would have been because of COVID-19. But he says if anything, health's ended up with more money.
I think if there's one thing that COVID-19 has shown us is that having a strong, well-funded health system is critical to the well-being of New Zealanders. And so, as I said before, there are some things you put on ice, but we don't put on ice the healthcare of New Zealanders.
The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists represents senior doctors and dentists. Its Executive Director, Sarah Dalton, says the announcement is great news, but she says the health system's been operating in a hole for so long, it'll take more than one budget to climb out.
Already we know that our public health system isn't sufficient to cope on its own, so there needs to be some decisions made about how that's stepped up to better cope, or will there always be a reliance on contracts out to private providers. But I'd also note that staffing levels are already short and you can't just magic up senior doctors.
She says that means investing now to train doctors and change systems to make them better in years to come. David Clark says the money today is mostly for operational costs, but he's hinted that on Thursday there may be more to address what's needed to help with buildings and infrastructure. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Principals are pondering what to do about bull rush, assemblies and drinking fountains under Alert Level 2. They have to ensure the 800,000 children who go back to school on Monday don't break the Level 2 rules when they're in the classroom and out in the playground. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
Schools are reopening on Monday, but they will still have COVID-19 rules to follow. Shane Buckner from the Canterbury Primary Principals Association says getting children and parents to follow those rules will start as soon as they reach the school gate.
We were actually asking our parents to actually just drop off at the gate, and we're going to have teachers at each of the three gates. We've identified which gates the different teams to go through, just to make it a wee bit less congested and all that sort of thing. And then the same thing at the end of the day, just saying to parents, actually, this is the area where you can be. Just make sure your child knows where you are when you want to see them at the end of the day.
He says teachers will remind children every day of the need to clean their hands and not get too close to their friends.
We've got that moisture breath zone that we're talking about now. So, of course, we'll be looking at that and just making sure we're talking about it every day, just reminding them after they've come in, they've sanitised on their entry and they've sanitised on the exit. They're not sharing a lot of resources. We are encouraging them to all have their own stationery.
That discipline will continue into the playground, where schools are taking different approaches on whether full contact games like Scrag and Bull Rush are okay. Stephen Lethbridge from the Auckland Primary Principals Association says they're likely to keep children in discrete groups during breaks, with a lot of staff supervising.
At lunchtimes, we'll be encouraging kids to wash their hands before heading out to lunch, before eating, and then when they come back in, making sure that they're washing their hands again, and we'll be wiping down any soccer balls and things along those lines that kids have been using.
Drinking fountains are a potential problem area, and Deirdre Shay from the Secondary Principals Association says schools will decide for themselves if they can be used safely.
I know in our case we're looking to have hand sanitizer there so that students can use that before and after. Everybody's encouraging, and the Ministries encouraging students to bring water bottles, so to fill water bottles. But certainly if we practice good hygiene and keep those drinking fountains regularly cleaned, they'll be absolutely fine.
She says many of the big schools are unlikely to hold full school assemblies under Level 2.
Schools will make their own decisions around whether they have assemblies for a start or not. Many I know are planning to continue with virtual assemblies, that kind of thing. In smaller schools they can probably space students out so that everybody's comfortable, because this is a situation where we want students and staff to feel comfortable, and of course families to know schools are taking good care.
Schools have the option of starting a staggered reopening from tomorrow if they're ready, but Deirdre Shay says she's aware of only a few planning to do that. She says most are using this week to ensure they're fully ready to welcome their students and teachers back on Monday. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The Prime Minister says rolling tangihanga will be allowed under Alert Level 2 after backlash from Māori over a limit of 10 people. Yesterday, Jacinda Ardern said the tangi and funeral limit would remain at 10 when the country moves to Level 2 on Thursday. It sparked backlash from Māori communities and leaders who said the low number for tangi was unfair. But this afternoon, Jacinda Ardern said that more than 10 people could attend if they viewed the body at separate times. Our Māori News correspondent Lee McLaughlin reports.
The announcement that tangi would be limited to just 10 people at level 2 hit close to home for Auckland lecturer Kylie Quince. In the past few weeks, 3 of her uncles died. The latest death was yesterday, and the whānau hoped the move to level 2 would mean at least he would get a proper tangi.
Definitely disappointed that there doesn't seem to be any, well, there really is very little shift from last week to the end of this week. And I think that whānau was certainly hanging out for, different rules and trust, I suppose, trust that we could safely gather together.
In the past 7 weeks, the rules around tangi have ranged from having none at all to allowing up to 10 people. Today, scores of people had taken to social media to complain that the limit has not changed. Wairarapa woman Irihapeti Roberts says her nana doesn't have long to live, and they've been planning how to have a tangi safely. She's created a petition to fight the limit.
My main issue with the government and why I started the petition is because the restrictions to me imply a level of distrust. Even though we came up with, as Māori came up with the initiatives such as the East Coast Wave, the No Hongi, those types of kaupapa before the government had restrictions in place. So I feel that it's unfair for a lot of whānau who have been very patient in observing the rules since level 4.
Ngāti Rangi leader Shay Wilson says it's disappointing when the government had earlier indicated the limit would be 100 people. He was one of many Māori leaders who gave advice to the government about how tangi could work safely at those numbers. Mr Wilson says 10 is just unfair, given restaurants, schools and shopping malls can all enjoy greater numbers at level 2.
If you put people under pressure and then they continue to see double standards, that just gets people upset and angry. And so we've got to trust in New Zealand that New Zealand knows what to do.
The Prime Minister has been pressed on the tangihanga restrictions all day. And this afternoon, Jacinda Ardern told reporters that groups of 10 could view a tūpapaku or body at separate times.
If we have people sticking with groups of 10, then that would be within the rules. What we don't want is them all then to come together at a conclusion. So a large wake or a large gathering afterwards. But yes, if you do have someone who is lying at marae and people are coming in groups, then yes, that is something that could be managed and would be within the guidelines that have been set.
The changes align with what's been allowed at funeral homes in level 3. The details of how it will work at marae and homes, whether close family are included or not in the limit, are being hashed out. But for Irihapeti Roberts, the change is bittersweet.
That's awesome to hear that there could be a rolling situation, but part of our issue too is not having an equal voice at the table as not only tangata whenua, but we're meant to be equal partners, and I feel like we've been silenced throughout this or ignored.
By 4 o'clock this afternoon, her petition to ease the restrictions on tangi had gathered nearly 3,000 signatures. For Checkpoint, I'm Lee Marama McLaughlin.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National. Is he up to the job? More calls for Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis to provide certainty for the industry. Could another buyer be waiting in the wings to buy media company stuff? A rush on PPE gear as beauticians, dentists and hairdressers get ready to reopen. An Australian radio shock jock, Alan Jones, resigns. We would love your feedback, especially if you're a tourism operator, and we'd also love to hear from you if you're a teacher, parent or a student about going back to school next week. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thanks, Lisa. A doctors' union says a DHB review of a coronavirus outbreak lacks transparency, and they fear the Waitemata District Health Board is covering up mistakes. 7 of its staff from Waitakere Hospital tested positive for the coronavirus after patients from St Margaret's Hospital and Rest Home in Auckland were moved there. The DHB ordered an urgent review into the outbreak earlier this month. There are no new reported cases of COVID-19. The total number of confirmed and probable cases remains at 1,497. 2 people are in hospital, neither are in intensive care, and there have been no new deaths. The Prime Minister has clarified the rules around numbers attending a tangi after a backlash from Māori communities and leaders who said the cap of 10 was unfair. Jacinda Ardern says more can attend as long as they view the tupapaku or deceased person at separate times. The National Party is threatening to withhold support for crucial legislation because of the limit, which leader Simon Bridges described as inhumane. The racing industry will get a $72.5 million emergency support package in Thursday's budget. The Racing Minister, Winston Peters, says the industry's already weak financial position has been worsened by COVID-19. There'll be a $50 million relief grant for the Racing Industry Transition Agency and $20 million from the Provincial Growth Fund for 2 new all-weather tracks. Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis says a budget day package to support the badly hit tourism industry will help many businesses, but it won't save all jobs. Thousands have been lost since the COVID-19 pandemic took hold. And principals are encouraging children to bring drink bottles when they return to school next week. They're developing rules so they can safely open or reopen under Alert Level 2, including whether drinking fountains can be used. The Secondary Principals Association says schools want parents and students to feel safe about returning to class. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. And if you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Giles Beckford joining us from our Wellington studio. Giles, another day, another company announcing closures and jobs going. This time, it's Bunnings.
Yes, the big Australian company is planning to close 7 stores around the country, 145 jobs at stake. The stores destined for the axe are Ashburton, Hornby, which if memory serves me right is Christchurch, Hastings, Cambridge, Rangiora, Te Awamutu and Putaruru. Now, they say that there were circumstances really that these stores were struggling, and I think that if truth be known, they were always perhaps thinking that some of these stores didn't have a future anyway, but the COVID-19 pandemic has just made matters worse. They said they looked at such things as locations, leasing arrangements, which means that some leases may have been up for renewal and they didn't want to pay perhaps a higher rate. And they also looked at the turnover for the stores and how they're performing. They're smaller format stores, and so from that point of view, not like the big barns which rake people in and have high turnover. They had already made the decision to close the Putaruru store. So from that point of view, it makes me think that the others may, or some of the others may also have been under threat. 145 jobs at risk, as we say. A prospect that some of the people there will be able to be redeployed in other places. But for the time being, yes, COVID at the very least, should we say, not necessarily to blame, but it's made the situation worse, and these will go. And I don't doubt that we'll see many more of these sorts of announcements from big and small retailers in the months to come.
And it is kind of interesting in the context that it's had, the company, quite a significant chunk in wage subsidies as well.
They have 4,500 staff in the country. They've got more than $27 million through the wage subsidy scheme. So they've supported a lot of workers, but in this case, they clearly weren't willing to try and push that to make these stores survive any longer. Of course, June is the end of the subsidy scheme in its current form at least, and that's when these stores are slated to close.
Giles, what can you tell me about this ultra-fast fibre sale? Who's involved here?
Well, it's pretty tedious, but the big thing that's been trumpeted, especially before COVID-19, everybody was getting so excited about 5G rollout, ultra-fast mobile data. In the blink of an eyelid, you would see your messages, your downloads. You'd be able to sit there and Netflix galore, in the bus. Now, the government had been due to have an auction of the spectrum. It requires a certain part of the radio frequency for the 5G rollout, and that wasn't going to be due until the end of this year. And the government had been a little bit vague about when it wanted to do that. But clearly COVID-19's got in the way. Spark and Vodafone had been toying with an initial rollout, and Vodafone had a little bit of the necessary spectrum sitting on the shelf for a rainy day, and it said, well, goodness me, that's quite nice, let's use this up. So it announced, if you remember last year, rolling out a sort of a half pie 5G in certain main centres. Spark did the same. The government this afternoon has given all the main telcos an allocation for a couple of years at least. Clearly, that will allow it to work out a longer-term solution, a longer-term option. One of the issues the government has to resolve, and Chris Farfoy's always acknowledged this, which of course is there are iwi rights involved in this. Iwi with a claim to the airwaves, long-established claim that's been recognised, and the government was looking at how to accommodate that within a 5G rollout and this particular spectrum. So it's a makeshift measure, short-term, last until towards the end of 2022, when there'll be a full-on auction.
Giles, before we move to the markets, do you actually watch Netflix on the bus?
No, actually, I've never seen Netflix. Except in reports. I don't have Netflix at home. I know I'm the only person in the country that doesn't.
I've always known you were a rare and exquisite creature, Giles, and that just proves it. OK, what was going on in the markets today?
I always prefer, as Jeeves used to say, I prefer an improving book. The markets, our top 50 index on the share market, up 58 points, just around 10,876, about 0.5%. 6 days in a row we've been on the up, so the market's in reasonably fine fettle. And for the Kiwi dollar, 60.75 American cents, just touching 94 Australian and 49.3 British pence.
Thank you, Giles. That's Giles Beckford, our business editor, with today's business news. Future ownership of the media company Stuff remains unclear after a tumultuous day on the markets yesterday and fresh revelations that other buyers are waiting in the wings. The government is remaining tight-lipped, refusing to say whether it will pass the legislation NZME needs in order for it to buy Stuff. And the main players, NZME and Stuff's owners, Nine Entertainment in Australia, have yet to front for interviews. And without much concrete information to go on, speculation is rife. Our business reporter Emma Hatton with the story.
A media commentator says it seems inevitable that Media Group Stuff will change hands this year, but he doubts there is a deadline for 2 weeks' time. In an extraordinary series of moves yesterday, NZME, the owner of the New Zealand Herald, regional papers and radio stations including News Talk ZB, said it wanted to buy Stuff for $1 and needed the government to make a political decision by the end of May. But Stuff and its owners, Australia's Channel 9, said it had broken off talks with NZME last week. Media commentator Duncan Grieve says the announcements have an air of brinkmanship.
Commentator suggested that Nine had told the government that they were out by May 31. My sources at Stuff suggest that that's not the case. You know, NZME delivered a May 31 deadline as well, but it seems to be an attempt by someone involved in the transaction to try and to ante up the pressure, but it's difficult to feel to understand whether that's real or not.
Andrew Holden, a former editor of the Christchurch Press and editor-in-chief of The Age in Melbourne, says there have been hints of other buyers wanting Stuff.
There's been plenty written recently around private equity in Australia showing some interest in Stuff and being a potential buyer of it. And there's certainly been suggestions that Todd Scott at NBR has claimed that he's got private equity backing and he's ready for such a move. There could be multiple players in it.
Indeed, the newspaper The Australian penned that piece yesterday, saying it understood a Sydney-based private equity firm in conjunction with the National Business Review were in talks with Nine. When RNZ contacted the firm, however, its founder said that was news to him, but wouldn't confirm if it had been in touch with Nine over its New Zealand assets or had discussed a deal. Andrew Holden says he could imagine players wanting to buy into parts of Stuff, which includes some of New Zealand's best-known papers, as well as the largest news website.
See the Smith family down in Dunedin potentially saying, well, we'll buy the Timaru Herald and the Press, in fact, in the other South Island mastheads, and make ourselves the powerhouse of the South and see where the rest of it goes. I mean, there are certainly many different options. None of them suggest that the government has to jump into bed with NZME's demand and say, right, we'll legislate and make this happen.
Media commentator and former New Zealand Herald editor Gavin Ellis says the conflicting statements by Nine and NZME are unlikely to be more than a genuine misunderstanding over where things were at.
You do not make statements to the stock exchange unless you firmly believe it to be the truth. There are too many consequences for playing games with the stock exchange.
He says a possible acquisition of Stuff by NZME for a low price would only buy them time to find a better business model. And in the long run, regional papers and newsrooms would be at risk of closing down. The Mayor of Palmerston North, Grant Smith, says a region can't afford to be without a local paper, and keeping these institutions, such as his local, the Manawatu Standard, afloat is important.
Having real investigative journalism is a real positive and necessary thing that we need, especially in this time of uncertainty. And you've got to have a local news outlet. If you don't have a local paper, then you just become a tag-on to, say, either a Wellington or an Auckland entity.
Meanwhile, Gavin Ellis says it's likely Nine or NZME will break their silence before the Government or Commerce Commission does, saying at the end of the day they owe it to staff who want to know whether there's a job at the end of the line for them. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
Beauticians, dentists and barbers are getting ready to get back to work, but they're also having to get ready PPE gear for working in close contact with their clients. Many small businesses have been buying their own protection equipment ahead of level 2, but updated government guidelines have now left some with too much and others fearing they won't have enough, while some say the guidance still isn't clear enough. Rachel Thomas reports.
People have been desperate to get their nails done or visit the physio, but for that, some precautions are needed. But now a Wellington chiropractor says she's overstocked on PPE gear as guidelines are more relaxed than she expected for working at Alert Level 2. Chiropractors don't tend to deal with bodily fluids or aerosols, meaning they don't need as much PPE as dentists, for example. Chiropractor Louise Blair says she'd already bought 6 boxes of face masks weeks ago because she knew they'd sell out.
You bought in the PPE and now you don't need it. So we've spent, I've spent $500, which is not that much, but it is when you've had no income for 8 weeks, on masks that we're now told at the last minute we don't need.
She estimates she's spent $1,000 all up on protective gear, including masks and gloves. Ms Blair says the guidelines state masks should be worn around vulnerable patients, but the details are not clear.
It's very, very hard to find information on if I put a mask on to see you and you're vulnerable and we decide to wear it and I give you a mask, then obviously your mask would go in the bin. But can I hang mine on a hook and put it back on? I don't know. So we're assuming that it's a new mask for every vulnerable patient.
Dentists know they must use full protective gear when they're leaning into the mouths of patients, but they fear they will run out. The New Zealand Dental Association says in urgent situations during lockdown, dentists could get PPE from their district health boards. But Chief Executive David Crum says they must otherwise carry their own supply, and there isn't much.
The unknown is what individual dentists are holding within the cupboards in their practices, but I've talked to all the dental industry supply companies, and at the most there's 2.5 to 3 weeks supply. So we hope we can get some more source of that.
He says at level 2, dentists can go back to using standard surgical masks as opposed to N95s that had to be used during lockdown. Those in the beauty industry say they haven't received clear guidance yet, so they're taking precautions anyway. But this comes at a cost. Wellington stylist Erin Tyson of Refuge Hair Boutique says she has 4 boxes of face masks, but she's not sure if she'll need any of them.
We've got everything, and yes, we will be wearing masks if we have to. But like I said, they actually haven't clearly said hairdressers wear masks, so we're ready for it. But yeah, it's just a little bit confusing at the moment.
The small town of Katikati in the Bay of Plenty has had no cases of COVID-19, and yet a beauty salon there is still taking extra precautions. Suzanne Bullivant of Dreamers says she spent lockdown working out how to do spa treatments safely in close contact with people.
When we're doing a facial, we'll be masked up but also have like what they call a shield mask on, and it just, again, will just give everyone more protection.
She says some of the extra cost is passed on to clients, which helps to cover PPE and spacing protocols. Ms Bullivant hopes people heed the Prime Minister's advice to stay away if they're sick.
I just think it's been, that Kiwi thing, oh, look, I've got a little bit of a, bit of a cold and I'll be right and I'll carry on and I'll come in and get my eyebrows shaped or whatever I need doing. I think they're the sort of things we'd like to see change permanently anyway.
And as we prepare to ring in more freedom, that remains the clearest message of all. If you're sick, stay home. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback, so do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A lot of you getting in touch about the wodge of money given to the racing industry today, so keep your feedback coming. Australia's most influential broadcaster and shock jock, Alan Jones, will retire at the end of this month. He told listeners on his breakfast show today that health worries have convinced him to wrap up his career in radio, which has spanned 35 years and been full of controversy. The ABC's Gavin Coote filed this report.
You're listening to Australia's #1 broadcaster, Alan Jones.
Easing back into the breakfast chair this morning, the 2GB broadcaster explained his absence on the airwaves last week.
One of those doctor things. These days I seem to have too many of them. Health-wise, though, I am okay.
But he went on to say that almost 35 years of getting up before 3 a.m. for the popular program, it's taken a toll.
Well, the experts are telling me in no uncertain terms, and not for the first time, I might add, and I quote, this is my letter from last week, Alan, continuing with the present workload is seriously detrimental to your health. I've listened to the experts and I'm taking this opportunity to indicate to my radio family that I will be retiring from radio at the end of this month.
Within less than an hour, some of the country's most powerful figures paid tribute to the broadcaster, who at times showed them no mercy. The New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, phoned in straight from her daily coronavirus update.
And I had to ask him in front of everybody, is it really true? And
yes.
So I'm asking you directly, is it really true?
It is true. May 29. Look.
Opposition leader Anthony Albanese and former Prime Minister Tony Abbott also rang in.
You've been prepared to say a lot of things that many other people would shrink from. You've led debate. You haven't just followed it.
Even old rivals phoned in. Alan Jones went head-to-head with John Laws for decades.
You and I have had the friendliest bitterness in the history of radio. I mean, everybody was so bloody bitter about John and Alan, you know.
That's right.
Even before he became a broadcaster, Alan Jones had an impressive career. He was a speechwriter for Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser, and he transformed the Wallabies, turning them from also-rans into a world-class rugby team, the team winning 23 tests out of 30 during his tenure. And that reputation as a hard taskmaster came to be the making of a radio titan.
Good morning and welcome to the end of the week and the beginning of the weekend.
And with enduring popularity over the years came plenty of controversy. There was the cash for comment scandal, where Jones was presenting items of news that had in fact been paid advertising. Then in 2007, the industry watchdog found he'd encouraged violence ahead of the notorious Cronulla riots in Sydney 2 years earlier.
There is deep concern down there, isn't there, of Middle Eastern invasion?
More recently, he's drawn controversy for his comments towards women. First with comments former Prime Minister Julia Gillard's father had died of shame. And last year he had this to say about New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
I just wonder whether Scott Morrison's going to be fully briefed to shove a sock down the throat. I mean, she is a joke, this woman, an absolute and utter lightweight.
That led to a mass boycott among the show's advertisers, prompting 2GB to promise a full review of the program.
And that was the ABC's Gavin Coote. Most developed countries around the world were swift to enforce 14-day quarantine for those arriving by plane. But not the UK, which is only just now raising the possibility. The BBC's Tom Burridge reports from London.
Soon, anyone arriving in the UK from anywhere apart from Ireland and France will have to self-isolate for 2 weeks.
I think it's necessary. I think we should all have quarantine because, I mean, they're doing it also in Germany.
It's a really nice idea, but they are late again.
Normally, Stansted would have 500 flights in a day. Today, there were just 16. It's hard to think forward to the summer, but airlines warn many people simply won't want to travel if they have to self-isolate when they get home. With their planes stacked up and static, British Airways, like other airlines, is hemorrhaging cash. The boss of its parent company today said a quarantine was a further kick in the teeth.
We had been planning
to resume on a pretty significant basis our flying in July. I think we'll have to review that based on what the Prime Minister said yesterday.
Around 100,000 people have arrived in the UK since the lockdown began 7 weeks ago. Opposition MPs say the government failed to prevent more cases getting in.
They allowed cases to be seeded all across this country over a period of months by not taking measures on the border and quarantine earlier.
The government says the relatively small numbers of flights and passengers means the number of cases of the virus which could have come in would have had a minimal impact on the overall prevalence of COVID-19 in the UK. The travel quarantine is expected to take effect at the end of this month. If people can't provide an address when they arrive, they'd have to self-isolate in government accommodation.
Tom Burridge reporting from London. Renovations on a heritage building in New Plymouth have set tongues wagging after they revealed signage dating back to when the city only had 4-digit phone numbers. Stories have emerged about a fish and chip shop owner who mysteriously disappeared, any number of liaisons at Penny's, the upstairs restaurant, and a secret smoking den under the stairs of one shop. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Grocer James McNeil had the reinforced concrete building constructed in 1925 at the cost of about £3,000. McNeil never occupied the building, which originally carried his name, and instead its tenants included a broad range of businesses, including James Roach's fruit shop and William Revell's hairdressers that were fixtures right through until the 1950s. Bruce Neal is the current owner of the building on the corner of Devon and Elliott Streets, which has been known as the East End building since 1939. He says the signs came to light during safety improvements.
Yeah, as layers came off, it just sort of revealed itself, and then we said to the boys on Friday, let's just unwrap the lot and leave it there for the weekend just to let everyone have a look. And God, people have been ringing up, phones been going crazy, there's people stopping and taking photos, so it was cool to just do for a few days.
Mr. Neal says one of those phone calls involved the fish and chip shop.
Yeah. Apparently, the husband mysteriously disappeared. That's about all we know. There isn't really it was I guess a husband and wife, kind of a fatty and skinny relationship. And he just either did a runner or he ended up in the deep fryer. Who knows? We'll never know.
Fashion and gift shop Shine now occupies the ill-fated Chippy's space. Its owner, Kelly Whitaker, can remember visiting it as a child.
I remember coming here as a kid and going upstairs, was it called Penny's? The restaurant upstairs, I can remember going there for dinner and coming to the shop I'm in now, which was a fish and chip shop. Next door was Shakely's, the pizza place. I'm a hairdresser from a long time ago, so I remember the hair salon next door.
Ms Whitaker says she would have liked the signs to remain up, but will repurpose some of them instead.
Yeah, I think a few of us are hoping to get a few of the signs. I'll use them in here because it goes with my look on my back wall. So, tidy them up and put them on the back wall.
Nikki Gibbons is the owner-operator of the Meraki Hair Collective. She's still getting over the fact the signs revealed her salon has been a hairdresser's for almost a century.
I thought it was pretty cool. We personally put a picture of it on our Facebook page because our shop happened to have a sign for a hairdresser from the 1920s from it. So it's actually been a hair salon since then as well. Even before we were in here, it's been, say, 3 salons that I know of, and then before that would have been this WJ Revell. Something about this space needs to be a hair salon, I think.
Miss Gibbons lives in a flat above the shops and says it's not uncommon for visitors to say they remember when it was a restaurant or the parties that used to be held on the awning. Meanwhile, Mr. Neal says the building has a habit of revealing secrets.
Yeah, there was the little old lady Anne in the laundrette downstairs. She was here for about 30-something years, and it wasn't till after she died and we were cleaning out that we discovered she had a little cupboard under the stairs where she used to hide out and smoke cigarettes, and that's when she ultimately died of lung cancer.
Mr. Neal says he's going to use some of the signage himself and display other elements of it at his yard. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ponei, ko Robin Martin aho.
Let's get to some of your feedback now before the news at 6 on tourism. Terry says, I would say that some of these successful tourism businesses have over previous years been paying out too much to shareholders and not retaining enough cash. Someone else has got in touch to say trumped up job losses in tourism. Over half employees are overseas temp visa holders, not to mention most employees are minimum wage employees. Tourism has taken millions in wage subsidies, more than Australia. Gary says, have the businesses, for example, Air New Zealand, tour operators and accommodation providers got together and made package deals for new customers. On the issue of the racing industry getting a significant amount of money today, Winston Peters announced a $72 million package. This person says 72 million, all in caps, for the racing industry, ! Which was in decline anyway. It's outrageous at a time like this. Let's support gambling and animal exploitation while the rest of the country is struggling. Just what we need. And Sarah has also got in touch to say, at no time in the past 8 weeks have I heard it argued that the racing industry is especially deserving of extra funding at this time. Tourism, yes, she says. Health, yes. The service restaurant sector, certainly, but not racing. So once again, we see Labour bending to New Zealand First's demands for coalition loyalty. Time for a general election and an end to the tail wagging the dog.
Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. MPs are pushing through critical legislation under urgency this evening to ensure the COVID-19 Level 2 conditions are enforceable. The opposition National Party had indicated it would support such efforts but is now threatening to oppose them, saying the 10-person limit for funerals is inhumane. The Attorney-General, David Parker, told Parliament the proposed law will ensure the new restrictions can still be enforced even after the state of emergency ends.
The measures in the bill take into account the particular characteristics of COVID-19 and give us the best chance to keep it under control.
David Parker says the legislation is not retrospective and insists the lockdown has been legal. Leader Simon Bridges says it's not right that people will be able to come together at cinemas, malls or on the rugby field, but not to grieve a loved one.
Let me personalise it in my situation, where I have an elderly father, there are 6 siblings, there are 6 partners, there are 20 grandchildren who would want to be at the funeral of someone who shaped our life in such a profound way.
Simon Bridges says the government needs to start trusting New Zealanders to do the right thing. The Prime Minister has offered hope to the tourism sector, promising the government will come to the table with a rescue package. Thousands of jobs have already been lost and some of the biggest names in the industry are in hibernation. The government's budget on Thursday will focus on easing the economic pain dealt by COVID-19. Jacinda Ardern says there will be more support for struggling businesses. She says more than 80% of tourism operators have accessed the wage subsidy scheme.
We also have looked at specific redeployment support to get their workforce into other opportunities, and you will see a tourism sector package delivered from this government as well.
Jacinda Ardern says the small business loan scheme has also begun accepting applications. The Doctors' Union fears the Waitemata District Health Board is covering up mistakes that led to 7 of its staff contracting COVID-19. Staff from Waitakere Hospital tested positive for the coronavirus after patients from the St Margaret's Hospital and Rest Home in Auckland were moved there. The DHB ordered an urgent review into the outbreak earlier this month. But Deborah Powell from the Resident Doctors Association says the review process has lacked transparency and it feels like a cover-up. Dr Powell says staff are becoming increasingly nervous. The Waitemata District Health Board declined RNZ's request for comment. It's expected to release the findings of the review later this week. Senior doctors say it will take more than one good budget for the health system to work its way out of the hole it's been operating in. The government has given more than $4 billion extra to the DHBs this year, the biggest increase in a decade. The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists Executive Director Sarah Dalton says it's a great boost to a very underfunded service.
We think it's a big step in the right direction. We think there are going to be further steps required, but I think that both Grant Robertson and the Prime Minister have suggested that they understand that.
Sarah Dalton says more is needed to fund training so the hospitals have the people power they need in the future. Principals are deciding how to organise classrooms and playgrounds under Alert Level 2 rules. They have just under a week before 800,000 children go to school on Monday. Principals told RNZ children will be expected to sanitise their hands whenever they enter or leave their classrooms. They say playtimes will be supervised and children will be encouraged to play games that don't involve close contact. Schools will ask students to bring drinking bottles, and some are turning off their drinking fountains during Alert Level 2. They say schools will not hold assemblies unless they can do so while keeping a safe distance between students. The police in Australia have arrested a man more than 30 years after the suspected murder of a Sydney-based American. Scott Johnson was originally believed to have committed suicide in 1988, but an inquest in 2017 found he was likely the victim of a gay hate crime. His body was discovered in the northern suburb of Manly, having apparently fallen from a cliff. Mr. Johnson's brother Steve says his family isn't the only one to have suffered similar tragedies.
I hope the friends and families of the other dozens of gay men who lost their lives find solace in what's happened today. And I hope it opens the door to resolve some of the other mysterious deaths of men who have not yet received justice.
Steve Johnson. It's 4.5 minutes past 6. Sport this evening. Many team sports at club level will still not be possible in New Zealand for at least another 2 weeks. Following yesterday's announcement on the transition to Alert Level 2 on Thursday, Sport New Zealand have confirmed the 10-person gathering limit will apply to community sport. Sport NZ boss Peter Skimming says they have worked closely with major winter codes on how and when their seasons can resume. He anticipates it being possible for competitions to restart around May 30th. The 10-person limit, as it relates to community sport, will be reviewed on May the 25th. And a $72 million emergency relief package has been announced by the government for the racing industry. Racing Minister Winston Peters says the industry was already struggling financially prior to COVID-19. The package consists of $50 million for the Racing Industry Transition Agency to pay creditors and $20 million to build 2 all-weather racetracks. And that's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. New Zealand remains at Alert Level 3 for just 2 more days. We will move to Alert Level 2 at 11:59 p.m. this Wednesday, the 13th of May. Continue to work and learn from home until then. Keep your distance from others outside your bubble. Remain local and travel only within your region. If you have any cold or flu-like symptoms, stay home and call your GP or healthline about getting tested immediately. Washing your hands, physical distancing, and other hygiene practices will help keep you safe now and in the future. Go to covid19.govt.nz for more on what you can and can't do when we move to Alert Level 2.
Now here's the Med-Service short forecast, taking us to midnight tomorrow Wednesday for Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Gisborne and coastal areas of Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy with a few showers. For the rest of the North Island, mainly fine, areas of morning and evening cloud, the odd shower for a time in northern Waikato tomorrow. Bulla, mostly cloudy, isolated showers clearing. Westland, mostly cloudy, an area of rain north of Harihari at first, but moving south this evening, clearing in the north. Fiordland, mainly fine, apart from cloud tomorrow evening. Nelson and Marlborough through to Southland, generally fine with high cloud, but a few spots of rain for Canterbury, clearing tonight or in the morning. And at the Chathams, mostly cloudy, drizzle at times. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome back to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The Tourism Minister is not up to the job and the Prime Minister should take over the portfolio, according to one tour operator. Haka Tours offers bijou and premium adventures throughout the country, including multi-day tours of our ski slopes, mountain, cultural and beach trips. Today, as General Manager Eve Lawrence spelt out the dire situation faced by her industry when she appeared at the Epidemic Response Committee. Ms Lawrence wants a clear plan and some certainty from Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis, and we'll hear more from her shortly. But we asked the Minister onto the program this evening to outline his vision for tourism post-COVID-19 and to talk about what kind of support there might be for the industry. He declined our invitation. But here's a taste of the questions Kelvin Davis faced at today's Epidemic Response Committee hearing.
Make no mistake, tourism will not be the same globally. COVID-19 has seen to that. But because of our actions, New Zealand is better placed than most. And every step of the way, we've sought to make sure that our response has been balanced and timely. We won't be making announcements.
Look, I don't want to cut you off, but it was to be a brief opening remark, and I think that's sort of covered out where we are at.
I've got just a couple of very important points to make.
Well, I'm sure they're important to you, but what's important to this committee is that we get to ask you questions. So let's see if we have time for you to conclude at the end.
I'm just going to finish off what I've just got to say, because I won't be making announcements today, but I can confirm that on budget day, we'll be announcing further assistance for the tourism sector, and this will include a tourism response and recovery package. So I've listened to the sector, we've worked together, and as the Minister and as a government, I believe our response and recovery plan is balanced, timely and considered.
Just about all of the submitters have said the wage subsidy has delayed the inevitable, which is that redundancy notices are being issued as we speak. What's your response to that?
Well, we just have to be real in the first instance. We know that in level 4 and level 3, there was no tourism, and that has been really, really hard for businesses, and we acknowledge that. Under level 2, the recovery can begin, domestic tourism will start. But we've been open and honest from the outset that we will not be able to save every business and every job, and that the wage subsidy scheme and the other business support package measures were just there to soften the blow, and it's given people time to think about what it actually means for their particular business.
When the government announced first that there would be mandatory quarantine for all entries to New Zealand and then to shut the border completely, can you just summarise what was your input to government about the impact of that on tourism and the support for tourism that would be necessary?
Well, regardless of the decision that the government has made, I've put my case and my point on behalf of the industry to Cabinet. We make these decisions as a Cabinet. And
yeah, I know, but the question was, what was your feedback?
Well, I'm not going to go into what discussions were had or not had at any Cabinet meeting, but what I will say is that I have fed in the views of the industry throughout the whole process since the very beginning of the concerns around COVID. And we have made collective decisions throughout that time in what we think are the best interests of New Zealand. And as I said, our first inclination was around health, and the health decisions have driven the economic decisions.
Yeah, okay, look, we're not going to get anything specific there. I understand you want to say, wait till the budget, but I wonder if you can explain how you're going to define the tourism industry for the support that I know you can't tell us about yet.
Well, you've made the very point that I want to make, that tourism is such a dispersed industry, from the person who's pumping gas at the koutou service station right through to the aviation industry, through to hospitality, through to accommodation. So it is a very dispersed industry, but we have a tourism recovery package to be announced later in the week. And people will have to wait just a couple more days to see what's in it and how it will help them.
Yeah, I get all that. But look, with respect, Minister, the whole point of this exercise is you come to the committee and we ask questions and you try to answer them. So the question was, how we know it's a dispersed industry, we know it's difficult, but how will you define it was the question.
Well, the tourism industry is an industry that works with or caters for visitors, be they domestic or international. But there isn't a definition of what tourism is. But so many people's lives.
If you've got a budget package to support tourism, you kind of need to be able to define it. That's why I asked the question.
Well, there will be criteria developed for people to access the package. So if they meet the criteria, they'll be able to access the package.
All righty. Always a pleasure, Calvin. Go well.
And that was MP David Seymour questioning the Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis at the Select Committee today. Hakatoa's General Manager Eve Lawrence says domestic travellers are not going to save tourism, and some operators won't make it till Thursday's budget, and any lifeline it may throw them. The company's potentially facing mass redundancies with our borders locked down indefinitely due to COVID-19, and it is hanging its hopes on a trans-Tasman bubble. And Eve Lawrence says level 2 isn't enough to keep operators afloat.
From a business standpoint, it doesn't actually make a huge amount of difference to us. We've already had to cancel all our tours up to October anyway. There's no international visitors coming in. And with the social distancing on tour buses, multi-day tours don't really appeal to domestic customers. So to us, it really makes no difference. The only difference it makes is that we can now get together as a leadership team and a business with the staff that we have remaining to discuss our strategy moving forward.
Okay, so a couple of things there. In terms of staff, how many were you employing? What are you looking at now?
Well, based on the fact that the subsidy is due to finish soon, we're looking at going from 184 full-time employees down to 13.5 FTE equivalent. That's not 13.5 employees, that's just full-time equivalent. So we have employed more, but they're on reduced hours. I personally am down to 2.5 days a week. We just don't have the business or the revenue to keep our staff on.
So this whole idea that we should drum up domestic demand for tourism, what would you say to that? I mean, can you survive on that? What percentage of the market would it be?
I've had a look at the numbers. We've discussed it with Tech NZ. And yes, we can target domestic market for sure. We also have an accommodation wing at Haka Tourism Group, which will provide some revenue to us. But realistically, we're looking at a best case scenario of potentially 20% revenue. We've been able to pivot some of our businesses to help out Auckland City Mission and some other government bodies in terms of accommodation for people that need it. So we have got some revenue coming in, and we can survive until potentially March. But if international borders don't reopen, even with 20% domestic tourism, we wouldn't survive much longer.
So when the Prime Minister says and has said several times that our borders are going to be tightly monitored, if not closed, for an extensive period of time, what effect has that had on your business and, say, future bookings?
Oh, well, we rely on a lead time from people coming in. So it's had a massive effect. Even end of February, beginning of March, we saw up to a 90% decline in tour bookings. And since the borders have closed, we've obviously seen lots of cancellation emails. There's been lots of confusion with insurances, where we stand with cancellations versus credit notes. It's been chaotic, to be quite honest with you, over the last 8 weeks. Confusion, not particularly clear communication from government ministers.
Anyone in particular?
Well, obviously, Kelvin Davis is doing his best to speak to all the tourism businesses, but communication has not been clear. It could be better. And
what do you need to be clear, Eve? What specifically do you need clarification around?
We need clear timeframes around if this trans-Tasman bubble takes off, how long realistically do they think it's going to take to put measures in place to make that happen? We need clear timeframes around whether we can have a wage subsidy extension to keep our people on. And we need clear information around any further financial support, because the bottom line is banks aren't lending to tourism businesses. It's a massive risk. Cash is king. We don't have cash flow.
How do you feel about the fact he's not able to give you those answers, seemingly?
It's incredibly disheartening to hear that questions don't get answered directly. And to be honest, we need a voice. We need a clear voice for tourism. And I just don't feel that we've had one up to this point.
So is he up to the job then, Eve? Is he up to the job?
From my current experience, I would say no at the moment. Had he given us clearer timelines around when he was meeting with the government, potentially when we can hear about a trans-Tasman bubble, then people would have been a lot happier. But we've just had nothing. We've just been getting the same message for 6 weeks now, more than 6 weeks.
And what's that message?
we'll let you know when we've got more clarity. I've been pushing for you. We'll hear on the budget. But sadly, for many, the budget day is already too late. Is what it is. It's wildly uninspiring at best.
So the Tourism Minister has also said that he has tasked Tourism New Zealand to, and this is his words, reimagine the industry, the tourism industry. What does that mean to you, and do you buy into that?
As I said in my speech to the Epidemic Response Committee earlier today, I do think that, yes, it's a campaign that we can buy into to at least get some revenue into our businesses to sustain us until the international borders reopen. So, yes, whilst I think it's a good campaign, I think first and foremost, he needs to be looking at saving the industry, because if he doesn't save us, we're not going to have an industry to reimagine. And with a country that relies on tourism as, providing 3.8 billion in GST and a huge chunk of our GDP, we really need to be saved.
How many of you are hanging on by your fingernails at the moment?
Oh, I would probably tell you that 99% of us are hanging on by a thread. With no cash flow, no business models for zero revenue, you just don't model for that.
So this Trans-Tasman bubble, you say you want some certainty. What do you need? Do you need a commitment within a certain time frame so that you can plan ahead for that? I mean, you would appreciate that it is based on a lot of unknowns for them, whether we have more cases, whether there's increased spread under lower levels. So they're dealing with a lot of unknowns. What do you need from them around that Trans-Tasman bubble?
Oh, I appreciate this is an unprecedented situation, and they're also in an incredibly difficult situation. But what we need from a Trans-Tasman bubble, we've got snow season rapidly approaching. Australia business is probably, for us at least, 60% of our snow season. So if we know in the next kind of 4 to 6 weeks whether we're going to have a Trans-Tasman bubble, we can at least know that the bookings we've got in place for our snow tours can still go ahead if people have the confidence to travel. So you
would like it to be a real operating thing within the next 2 months?
I would like to be able to say that we can put some measures in place to have operations going for July, August potentially. But if not, we definitely need to look at it ASAP, because this industry is being decimated at the moment and we need something to help us pull us out the ashes.
Have you made your time frame clear to the Minister, what your expectations are?
100%, we all have. We've all made it quite clear, even 2 weeks ago, that we needed to know about the wage extension subsidy yesterday. We don't need to know now. We needed to know 2 weeks ago, because realistically, you're looking at a 12-week wage subsidy. During that 12 weeks, an employee racks up 4 to 5 days of annual leave. That's just additional money that we then need to pay out as a business. So we needed to know weeks ago. But if we can, Thursday for me, this morning was great to have the opportunity. My concern is that the budget is already written for Thursday, and it was just appeasing us in terms of hearing our voice. But I'm hoping we made some impact.
So he being the Tourism Minister, has said today and said at that select committee that there is going to be a response and recovery package in the budget. How big, how substantial does it need to be to make a difference for you? Let's start with the wage subsidy. You need it extended, you say, at the same level or more targeted and more for the tourism industry? Give me an idea.
I think it needs to be more targeted for tourism and underpinned industry. If you look at what Australia are doing, they're giving Kiwis 765 Australian dollars a week for 6 months to help them keep their jobs and survive. And I think a 6-month time frame is realistic. So if they extend the wage subsidy for another 12 to 14 weeks, that could really help us get off our feet again and keep our businesses alive moving forward.
So that would in essence mean that the government has been subsidising wages for a good half of the year.
Yeah, Yeah, it will. And not for everyone, but specific industry again. I mean, the initial wage subsidy was extended to businesses that had received a 30% revenue loss or more. And like I said earlier today, if we were trading at a 30% loss right now, we would be incredibly happy. I think they do need to raise that threshold if they're going to do a targeted response with additional wage subsidy. Potentially look at 50 to 60% or more revenue loss, because realistically, that's what we're looking at. Some businesses are looking at 100%. We're lucky in the sense that we're only kind of seeing 80% now, but this is just with some accommodation contracts. So,
do they need to cut some people loose, though? Because the argument is that they could be pumping money into businesses that simply are not going to make it. So is it necessary at this point to get rid of the dead wood and just accept some people will not survive and there's no point putting more money into it?
I don't know if I agree with that approach, because this is an unprecedented situation. And like I say, no business forecasts for zero revenue. They haven't been asked to be put in this position, and neither of the government. I completely understand that. But whilst the opinion of we can't save everyone, look, but we can try and save as many as we possibly can. Unemployment is going to hit an all-time high if we don't increase this wage subsidy. We employ a huge percentage of the New Zealand population in the tourism and underpinned industry, and we need that wage subsidy to be extended.
Can you identify one positive thing that you think the Tourism Minister has done for your industry during this time?
Look, I don't want to bash Kelvin Davis. I don't have any idea of the level of detail he's gone into in the background with some of these tourism industries. I know he's spent a great deal of time talking to us all, and he says he's been pushing our point with the government. So if he has, then I thank him and commend him for that. But without knowing the full detail, I can't begin to tell you that.
Okay. Let me ask this then. You say that your industry is desperate for an advocate right now in a minister. If he's not that advocate, who is?
For me personally,
yeah.
I think we need to go back to the John Key approach and have Jacinda Ardern as our tourism representative. She is a fantastic ambassador for New Zealand as far as the press are concerned. She's received fantastic media coverage globally, and she would be a fantastic ambassador to get people to visit our country. And we will be a safe haven and somewhere people want to visit, and I think she would be the perfect person.
Is she aware of your frustrations, do you think?
Oh, I've sent various emails. I've obviously not had any responses. I'm sure she's a very busy woman having a child and obviously running a country. But we've obviously been voicing our concerns.
And that's Eve Lawrence from Hakatours. It is 25 minutes past 6. Under levels 3 and 4, we learnt how to queue. So what will a trip to the supermarket look like under level 2? Well, Countdown's Kiri Hannafin joins me now. Kia ora, Kiri. What changes will there be at the supermarket at level 2?
Well, in terms of safety processes, there'll be no changes. We're going to, we like what we've done with level 4 and level 3. Our team have responded well, and I think customers kind of really appreciate the extra care. So we're going to be maintaining kind of the strict processes we have, but there'll be changes insofar as there's no more limits, which is pretty exciting, and we'll be opening our stores at their usual opening time. So hopefully there won't be any queues because we'll be trading longer. But if there are queues, it's because we're trying to keep everyone safe.
Yeah, because queues, well, the novelty of that may wear off as the winter months come upon us, eh?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, we're really mindful of that. We've been putting some shelters up around the country and really exposed kind of forefronts of supermarkets. But we're really hoping that having longer hours will make it a bit easier. But yeah, we're so sort of firm on limiting the number of people in our stores that if there are queues, I hope people get that it's coming from the right place. It's for the right reason.
So you're saying normal hours? Will some of the stores, or extended hours, will it go back completely to normal? Will some stores be open 24 hours?
No, we're actually not going to do that. So the stores that were open 24 hours or till midnight, we're actually going to keep everyone back to 10. We think that's the right decision at the moment. But what we are doing is opening at our usual hours. So stores that opened at 7 in the past or 6, they'll open early. We're stopping the priority emergency hour for sort of frontline workers. So that will be an extra hour shopping for sort of everyday Kiwis. So we think that extra time in stores and people sort of shopping before and after work will really ease the queues during the day. So it's got a lot better over the last few weeks, to be honest, but it wasn't much fun in level 4 for many people.
Absolutely. So the other thing that we have noticed is that some supermarkets aren't allowing you to take bags in to pack your groceries. groceries to speed up the process. Your groceries go straight into the trolley after the checkout and you take them out and pack them at the car. Is there any suggestion that Countdown is going to do that?
No, we didn't. We decided not to do that. We're happy for people to pack their groceries in our store. It seems to be working well. We've made quite a few changes to the checkout, but we sort of thought we don't want to keep you in the cold car park for any longer. So you're welcome to pack your stuff in your own bags in our stores.
Other things people want to know about is there anything that you're still short of? A question's still coming in about flour, Kitty, and that it is still a bit of a scarcity.
We've got to stop baking. Where's it all going? Flour's good. We've even got hand sanitizer back in the stores. I couldn't believe it. I saw it. I grabbed some for my parents today. We're really getting on top of the supply chain, which is really quite amazing because we're at the bottom of the world, really, for most supply chains. So everything's being replenished. Flour is simply because we're baking. It's completely demand. It's not scarcity. It's demand. We have got an insatiable appetite for baked goods.
So what about online as well? That's another one. Do you have to wait for a space? Is there still the rush on to get an online shop?
No, actually, that's really improved. We've really improved our capacity. So we opened that as a massive dark store here in Auckland. So actually, most people now can order and get the same day delivery, which is great. It's sort of back to normal, and we're still sort of really working. We're keeping the priority service for our most vulnerable. But actually, most people, and please come back if you sort of stop shopping, to clear up the space for the most vulnerable people. No, it's good. We're really happy with the capacity we've got on online.
What do you think the biggest lesson is that you've learnt during this time?
The biggest lesson. Well, for me, the thing that I'm most proud of is that we kept our team safe. That your most valuable part of your business is your team. They've done such a great job, and putting them first has meant they can put customers first. So I think the lesson there is, love your people.
Have they been paid their bonus for level 4 yet?
They should be getting paid this month, in the middle of the month. It's taken a long. It's been a hard process getting that worked out. Apparently, I'm not a sort of finance person, but apparently it was much trickier to work the payroll system than I would have thought. But no, they all have been advised they'll be getting paid in the next week or so.
The other thing is there was a lot of complaints and mumbling about whether groceries were more expensive during this time. Just really quickly, has MB got back to you about any complaints that they've received that have been substantiated?
So MB sent us the list of the complaints that they received relating to our business. There are about 70 items, 70 grocery items. Some of them were things like a block of cheese.
Okay, sorry, Kerry, we're almost out of time, so nothing stood up as yet about complaints.
Provided information on every product, and they haven't come back, so we're pretty happy with that.
Thanks, Kerry. Appreciate your time. That is all we've got time for this evening. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. MPs are pushing through critical legislation under urgency this evening to ensure the COVID-19 Level 2 conditions are enforceable. The government is defending restrictions on tangis and funerals. Tourism operators say hundreds of thousands more jobs could be lost while they wait for details of a support package. Australia's Treasurer has delivered a sobering economic outlook, saying the deficit is almost $10 billion higher than forecast. And principals preparing rules for reopening schools next week say children will need to sanitize their hands whenever they enter or leave their classrooms.